Okay, the Water Quality Management Committee meeting Thursday, October 5th, 2017 will come to order. We note our observer from the league, Ms. Cronin, is with us. Our observer from the Enterprise is with us, and Mark from the Conservation Commission, the new member there, who apparently didn't get enough meetings last night.
Also one-time member of Mashpee's Supervision.
Yes, this is actually useful. Our next meeting is going to be at Mashpee with the Sewer Commission to talk about Walkway Bay and what we've all been doing. So this could be useful. First item was Mr. Johnson-Staub coming to talk about a sub-budget piece for the special town meeting.
I have a suggestion,
yeah.
Since he's not here.
Yeah.
Item 3, which is a review of the betterment, is something that we could easily stop, whereas the West Falmouth presentation, I think once we get into it, would be better.
4, you mean, the betterment?
So, yes, item 4.
Okay. All right, let's start with item 4, hearing no objection.
We get it up on
Okay.
the screen.
So what we're about to present is the Little Pond Sewer Project. Here we go. All right. We're about to present Peter Johnson-Staub, Assistant Town Manager.
Good afternoon.
Peter, you probably have to be at the microphone.
Okay.
As you tell everyone on Monday nights.
I want to say good evening because I'm always used to being here in the evening. I didn't
Right.
realize your meetings were televised.
Yeah.
So I am here to discuss the next phase of the town's aquaculture planning process. And as I think you are probably aware, but perhaps some of the audience may not be, this is specifically a new foray, breaking some new ground statewide in aquaculture, in that we are investigating rotational aquaculture plan, meaning that the aquaculture would be placed for part of the year in areas that are conditionally closed because of the water quality of the season. There's, as you know, there are areas, embayments, and estuaries that during the warmer months are not eligible for shellfish harvesting. So the idea there is that they're very productive and they grow shellfish very quickly. And can we set up a program where we have aquaculture there, we grow the shellfish to a point before they become marketable, and then move them to an area that is open, so that they there's a technical term for it which Sia can help me with, but basically they get cleaned out and they reach a point where they're able to be consumed.
Depuration.
Depuration. Depuration. Thank you. So with Sia's help, working with a working group with the town manager and a variety of stakeholders from recreational and commercial shellfishing, as well as those interested in pursuing aquaculture, we developed a draft aquaculture plan, and that we've had a couple of public meetings on that. We brought it to the Board of Selectmen, and it is still in draft form because we have some operational issues that are yet to be worked out. And those operational issues relate to some of the financial elements, some of the particular gear requirements, and specifying exactly where we're going to. We've got 14 sites that have been an extensive part of this process with input, not just from the shellfish stakeholders, but also from homeowners in the abutting areas. We've narrowed down the potential locations to 14 locations. And we want to continue to develop that plan and work out our financial issues, and then of course go through a permitting process. And we're breaking new ground with the State Division of Marine Fisheries. So we expect that permitting process to take some time and perhaps more than ordinary effort, because there is not just a direct benefit to the holder of the permit for aquaculture, but also a community benefit for water quality purposes. We are looking to have the town help to pay for that permitting process. And then we, again, because we're trying to balance the interests of wild harvest recreational and commercial shell fishermen, we also are looking to include an element of this aquaculture plan that would involve seeding, creating some additional seed as part of the value created by the aquaculture plan. So there's a give back to the recreational and commercial wild harvest as well. So we will be bringing to town meeting a request for $45,000 to continue this work, to flesh out the last operational set of questions that we have for the plan. I finalize the pilot sites. We're going to choose probably about 3 sites to be permitted. So to select those sites and then to permit those sites. And that is what we are bringing to town meeting. We want to make sure that that your committee is aware of this project. Hopefully, get your support and certainly welcome any questions or suggestions that you might have.
Well, we've certainly been aware of it, since your consultant and our consultant are one and the same.
It's a nice linkage there.
I mean, our interest is very specific. We only have so many tools in the toolbox to reduce nitrogen in our estuaries, and one of them is shellfish. We need to know how much nitrogen we can remove from each estuary, and obviously the maximum, the more the better from our point of view. And this plan dovetails very nicely with this, because at the end of the conversation, there will be at least a plan that says you can put this many in this water body, and we can conclude from that that can be part of our CWMP for these water bodies. Any other comments or questions? Virginia?
All the way along, Peter, you said we. The department that's involved is Marine and Environmental Sciences.
Correct.
This supplemental budget is going into their budget?
Correct. Thank you for that clarification, because I should have mentioned Chuck Martinson is, obviously one of the most important players in this, and has been had a strong role in developing the plan.
Right, and I think he's been a leader in the town, and he's really forward-looking on this particular topic, and we're very lucky to have that.
Yeah, I was going to say not just a leader in the town, but in the Commonwealth.
Exactly. This is uncommon.
Any other comments or questions from anyone else on the committee? If not, we thank you for coming. We'll be with you at town meeting.
Mark has a question.
Oh, sure, Mark.
Have you looked into how you make sure they all get harvested, or if you have to? I don't know anything about that aspect of it. To be successful from their point of view, you got to get it out of the water.
Right, so that's the advantage of aquaculture as opposed to seeding. So these are going to be grown out in racks.
Gotcha.
So the growers are going to grow them, and then they're going to pull them out and sell them. So 100% of that is going to come out of the water.
Okay,
Comments, questions? Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Item 2, discuss the draft scenario for achieving TMDL compliance in West Falmouth Harbor watershed. That's on the screen.
We try to nail it up, or we just see?
Well, yeah.
Maybe one last.
I think we should say by way of introduction that we have been doing draft scenarios for all of the impacted estuaries in Falmouth, and we've gradually been working down through the ones that were on the Buzzards Bay side. This is the last one on the Buzzards Bay side, and then we're going to start looking at the south coast.
Yep.
But they all have a certain format in terms of the data that is presented and the questions that are asked.
Right, and the foundation of these scenarios and the information are the Massachusetts Estuaries Project reports that have been completed for all of these impaired waters, as well as the TMDL documents that are born out of those scientific studies. So we've got West Falmouth today. This is our GIS map of the West Falmouth watershed. As you can see, it's again a teardrop that goes pretty far up. It's all in Falmouth, but it goes up far. And I think what's different is that it really tapers off as it heads away from the water. And there's quite a bit of sub-watersheds in the lower part of the estuary. This polygon is the wastewater treatment facility, and that's going to come up as an important part of our discussion. This is the Mashapaquet Creek sub-watershed, and this is Mashapaquet Creek, and that will come up also in our discussion, so I'm pointing it out here. This is the Snug Harbor sub-watershed, which will also come up in our discussion. So Mashapaquet Creek and Snug Harbor and the West Falmouth watershed. Here is, it would look better in the dark, but it's an aerial, and what you can start to see is here is the developed part of the wastewater treatment facility. This is a lot of the Thomas Landers Road
Industrial.
you know, sort of activity and pits. Here's the harbor, here's the residential areas. And if you were to think about where Mashapaquet Creek is, Mashapaquet Creek is here, and Snug Harbor is right in here. Here is a close-up of the actual harbor itself. And again, this peninsula is a good, or this landform is a good way of remembering where Mashapaquet Creek is and Snug Harbor. So this is the Snug Harbor sub-watershed, and Mashapaquet Creek comes right under. This is Nashawina Street, and this is where the bridge is, right here, where that dot is. And the Sentinel Station is right here, in the upper part of the Snug Harbor sub-watershed. And this is the nitrogen contour, average nitrogen concentrations from the measured results. And this is really interesting. Mashapaquet Creek is the most highest concentrations, over 1 milligram per liter in the creek. And this is where the Sentinel Station is, right here. But if you look at other parts of the harbor, you've got concentrations that actually meet the TMDL. So I think this is a very worthwhile map to have put as part of our review. Thank you, Steve. And what we have is the MEP report, which was done before the wastewater treatment facility effluent concentration was reduced to 3. So these numbers are pre-wastewater treatment facility plant upgrades. And so if you pretend that it didn't happen, which we shouldn't, and you take the concentration of the old effluent, which is 23.5 milligrams per liter, then there's over 8,000 kilograms that need to be removed. But we know what happens in Falmouth, and we know that the wastewater treatment facility has been upgraded to great expense, I mean millions of dollars. And a model run was done before that work was commissioned to see what would happen if the effluent concentration went from the historic 23.5 milligrams down to the 3, which is what we have today. And the answer is, if you discharge 410 gallons per day at that 3 milligrams per liter, you meet the threshold load that's prescribed by the Massachusetts Estuaries Project. And that's why it was done. And it's just a piece of history. I've got 3 slides, so we're just going to let me get through it and then we're going to talk. So the sort of key planning factors are the discharge of 410 gallons per day of treated effluent to the 3 milligrams of nitrogen per liter achieves TMDL compliance. That was based on a model run that was done in 2007. It's in a tech memo that this committee has seen back in 2014. It's part of the CWMP appendices, and it shows that. We also have a settlement agreement recently for the recent plant upgrades in the Little Pond Sewer project that allows the town to discharge 450,000 gallons per day, which is 40,000 gallons per day more than the model run. Well, we can do some simple arithmetic and see how much additional nitrogen that 40,000 gallons and puts into the watershed, knowing that at 410, we've met the TMDL? The answer is, and you can see the math, it's 166 kilograms a year. And so if we do our nitrogen counting, which we do every time, I'm just going to go here, we see that it's 166 kilograms. Now, the Buzzards Bay Coalition has also looked at before and after the upgrades to the wastewater treatment facility. And before, 70%, 69% of the load was coming from the wastewater treatment facility. And after those wastewater treatment facility upgrades, only 24% is coming from the plant. I mean, there's still a load, but the idea is we would be meeting the TMDL at 410,000 gallons per day, but at 450, which is what we're permitted for, we still need to remove 166 kilograms. So how can we do that? Well, 160, I mean, we've been looking at numbers like 5,000, so 166 is really quite straightforward. And when we were looking at the calculations as we've done in the past, I thought it was very interesting, and that's why I threw it up here, that if we took 25% of the stormwater load and 25% of the fertilizer load, as we've said in the past, we have a fertilizer bylaw that gives us that credit for the fertilizer, and we would think about specifics for stormwater, but as the Cape Cod Commission 208 planning process has said 25% for stormwater, we're saying 25% for stormwater. We would get there. We would get more than the 166 gallons just with fertilizer and stormwater.
106 kilograms.
Kilograms, right. So one of the things the committee has also recognized is sometimes stormwater improvements are not as easy to find because they're not big point sources. They're very dispersed, they're very separate. It's hard to find the land that you need for infiltration. So stormwater isn't necessarily your easiest and best option for removing nitrogen. So we went ahead and looked at a shellfish scenario, of course, and an IA scenario, which have been our typical non-traditional scenarios. And if you look at uptake and denitrification, you need about 400,000 animals to get 166 kilograms. And what's happening in West Falmouth presently with the bottom planting that comes out of the Little Pond nursery area, the relay area in West Falmouth, it's approximately a million oysters going in already. And there's a quahog planting that Marine and Environmental Services does to the tune of about 500,000 quahogs. So we have an abundance of shellfish going in already to meet this uptake requirement. And our oyster bed has approximately 300,000 oysters in it as well. So it looks like we're there from a shellfish perspective for West Falmouth once the plant plume flushes through.
Right.
And it hasn't flushed through yet. But here's our shellfish scenario, and it's great to see that our shellfish work and our demonstration projects have actually led to real numbers that we need. If we wanted to do it with innovative and alternative septic systems, which are also going on in West Falmouth, we would only need to put in 25. Is that true? No. What am I saying? Yep.
Above and beyond the ones that are in now?
No, 25 total. So fertilizer gets us 91, and then we need to put 75,
Kilograms.
25 IA systems would get us 75 kilograms. Look at my work here. Just by the math if you take the 4. So it seems that we've got some activity in West Falmouth through our West Falmouth demonstration project as well as our shellfish demonstration project that have carried the day with what needs to be done besides having the plume flush through. And I wanted to just show the area that we considered for the West Falmouth project so you'd see what the 300-foot buffer is around the watershed. So I think that's the story. You guys usually have thoughts and adjustments for me to make. So I'm going to go back to my desk.
Comments and questions. Steve?
Well, the same issue that we brought up with Quistit Harbor, where do you put the oysters? It doesn't matter because Eric just pointed out You're almost there with IAs, so it's really academic. But we can't keep saying that you put oysters in the good places and it takes care of the bad places.
So the oyster bed,
They're in the bad places.
Oh, okay. Then we should make it clear that,
Yes.
right,
so that especially other people working on aquaculture plants and realize, can't say, oh, well, they just want them in West Falmouth Harbor, and because of blah, 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 and some neighbors, we can't put them in Mashpee Creek, so we'll put them out here. They need to know that that doesn't work.
right, so the oyster bed is right there. That's why we
In
put it there,
Mashpee.
right at,
It's in the creek.
Oh,
It's in the
okay.
creek.
It's
Yeah.
immediately west of the bridge.
Right.
Oh, so you can get all 300,000 in there.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's an enormous lot.
John?
That's not where you're relaying, though. You're relaying into the outer,
and,
southern
For
and,
harvest, yes.
for harvest.
and Abbott's Point. So the commercial is
Which is
Abbott's
that
Point,
peninsula.
which is that peninsula at Snug Harbor.
I just wanted to suggest, I mean, one of the things with this scenario is that we not only have to meet the TMDL today, we have to carry it through to build out. And so there's always going to be a challenge. We haven't seen the plume from the wastewater plant come through yet. We're not even close to meeting the TMDL at that Sentinel station. And I would suggest another thing that we might think about is the coalition in conjunction with the West Falmouth project have identified a 300-foot buffer around the harbor in which there are 161 homes. And if we were, for instance, to declare West Falmouth Harbor an area of critical nitrogen concern, and then mandate that any time a home, one of those homes within that 300-foot buffer had a change in ownership, had a failure of a septic system, had an increase in flow to the septic system, or that the dwelling was itself improved by some percentage, 10 to 25% of the price of the dwelling, not of the land, that we would mandate that those homes put in IAs that meet the standard we've used in West Falmouth, which is 12 milligrams per liter. That's just a thought to throw out on the table, but I think it's a mechanism that would let us begin to pull in houses, and the rationale, which I think we've all chatted about, using that 300-foot buffer. You get no natural remediation in that 300-foot buffer, so that anything in a septic system that goes into the ground in that 300-foot buffer goes right into the water body. So that if you can intercept that with an IA system that's getting 75% removal, you're going to have a big impact on the water body.
Tom?
Well, a couple questions. How many kilograms per year does the treatment plant remove? We must have a pretty good handle on that. It's 88% or whatever the load.
So I'd have to do the calculation. The
Oh, it's not-
88% was in the Little Pond Sewer Service area. All of the
Oh,
sewered
it's not
homes.
for the townwide.
No, no.
Not
Okay.
townwide.
No, that was for the Little Pond
And-
The
watershed.
number I remember was 90% removal, I thought, but
Well, it's the
It's
difference,
very high, I don't exactly
Yeah.
remember that, and you have to remember that it's not just the collection of sewage from the town, you also have
The
septic
septic,
coming
right.
in, and the septic is not always from Falmouth, so that
Right.
creates extra strength. The really telling number is the 3 milligrams per liter. At the end of the pipe, before it goes out into a sand filter bed, it has to be 3 milligrams.
right, but I'm just putting it in context of the previous model said the loading of the watershed
Was
was-
23.5.
Yeah.
was X, and the operators of the plant must have a pretty good idea of the mass of nitrogen that's removed. And the other thing that confuses me, because I thought years ago there was the thought that there was about a 6 or 7 year lag
10.
for that plume to get to the harbor's edge, and of course, perhaps less for the creek, dramatically less for the creek, because the flow rates, the topography and all, I think indicate that, I don't know what the numbers look like, actually. And the other thing is, when we do a planimetric view of the nitrogen concentrations, the creek looks like a bleeding sore. And if we had a cumulative volumetric of the harbor, which should be easy to gen up from the numbers the modelers have of the harbor, you'd see at the beginning of your cumulative curve this little intensely red thing, and then when we looked at the volume of the whole harbor, volumetrically, it meets the standards. So, and I know the philosophy behind the whole thing is to look at the worst parts of each of our embayments, and the assumption is if we can bring those up to our desired level, things will be, no, I shouldn't say rosy, it'll be some other color for the rest of the harbor. So anyway, just some thoughts, because the early models obviously included the input, and you've got septage and everything else, and all of that was watershed loading, regardless of where it came from.
Right.
Whether it came from out of town
Right.
or whatever, and trucked in and dumped in those beds. I just wonder what the numbers would look like if we could plug those in and see what's actually being taken out by the plant.
Well, we probably, I mean, yes, it's probably possible. If you could go back to the original watershed and sub-watershed map. There we go. So that polygon shows the areas where wastewater was discharged at various times. The southern end of it was where the spray irrigation area was. There were direct infiltration beds fairly close to the plant, and that's the Snug Harbor piece of the watershed. And then subsequent sand filter beds were built to the north, and that's in the Mashapaquet Creek sub-watershed. In addition, if you see all those little brown dots, there are lots of houses around. So Mashapaquet Creek is not only getting groundwater from more distant location, it's also getting a lot in the immediate area. And one of the scientists that's sort of monitoring some of these installations, these IAs, told me that it was amazing, just background level of nitrogen in the groundwater was variable, but was clearly high.
Yep.
And because you have so many residences in the area.
Ron?
Oh, thanks, Eric. I think if we go back to the, a little bit about the time that has gone by since the plant was upgraded. The 23.5 milligrams per liter that was being discharged of nitrogen per was then reduced to 3 milligrams, about 90% drop, roughly. Well, not quite 90. But the question then comes in that in terms of the wells, the sampling wells between the plant and the harbor, how much change has there been going upstream? Because we can see that, and we know the harbor is still impaired, even though we've had 11 years of time, which should be enough time for the plume to basically be fully improved based on the 3. So one question comes in is that if we were discharging 23.5 in 2005 or 2006, how much of that was attenuated? Did it get down to like 2 over time coming into the harbor? But we can look at the well samples, because if 3 is coming out, it too may be coming down to 2. I don't know. We have to look at those wells to see exactly what load actually reached the harbor. And agreed too about this zone nearby of the houses and the discharge. But to see just how much improvement that investment proved, because now we should see clearly in the sample wells over time a drop in the nitrogen load that exceeds what was previously there 11 years ago. So I think that is a very important thing, because I don't know what the data, now we had a Sentinel station reading on which the models were based to an extent of what it was and what it needed to be. And I don't know what it is now. I've not seen any reports on where it stands. They say the harbor's still impaired, but has it improved? Has the load been reduced in terms of the total maximum load per day? The other, so that's one question. I think we need to get that data and look at really where things are, because we have the capacity to do an evaluation now, and we can see really what's happening, and then planning, because a lot of the assumptions here, the rosy assumptions, are that the plant will make the big difference, but it hasn't yet, and it was expected to. So I think we need to look at that in our real-time planning going forward. Then a second thing, this is an aside, not aside, but it's related. There were also oyster beds put in to, was it Mashapack?
Mention those, yep.
Yeah. Are those still alive? Are they still viable and growing? Do we know? For folks that don't know, an oyster bed is like an oyster reef. You put down shells with baby oysters stuck on them, oyster shells, and then they grow, and they make more and get bigger, and you have substrate. So is that component, because that was another strategy with shellfish besides aquaculture, looking. So do we know if it's alive and
We'd have to
doing
ask
well?
Marine and Environmental Services.
Okay, because I haven't seen anything on that. It'd be good to know if that's
Yep.
if that's also working, because so there's some data, some information that we actually have access to, or should have access to, that we could help in our planning process, because right now we're making some assumptions that make sense in terms of the plan of what was expected, but the result has not been what was expected so far. So I would suggest we get more information on that from the wastewater department. That'd be good.
Point. Steve?
I think Ron's point is very good. I mean, if the change in the plume was supposed to get there in 10 years and it's been 11 years and it hasn't, we really need to know why. And my other question is that lower embayment, I've forgotten the name of it, but it was the other one that wasn't dark blue, it wasn't red, but it was light blue. The southernmost embayment of, if you go to your other,
That's
if
Oyster
you go to the
Pond.
color.
Oyster Pond?
It's called Oyster Pond.
A different oyster, yeah.
A different
Can you
oyster
go
pond.
to that slide?
I can.
My favorite one with the colors.
Right, put them in here. That's-
Yeah.
There we go.
You said all the oysters were up in Mashapack Creek. Do we have to do anything about that?
I don't think so, because the Sentinel Station is up here.
There's more than one Sentinel station.
No, there's one Sentinel
No,
Station.
there's only one
There are a
Sentinel
number of
station.
monitoring stations, but
Oh.
only one Sentinel station.
And it's right in Snug Harbor,
And it's right
right
in Snug
in the
Harbor.
northwest corner, so yeah, right.
Right.
And
up there.
aesthetically, the water quality is decent there? I mean, the Buzzards Bay Coalition or the neighbors won't say that we've neglected them?
I think it's pretty
When
terrible.
it's so
right,
obvious,
actually.
you know, the two
Yeah.
light areas.
Interestingly, about a year and a half ago, the county, help me out here, the organization that does restoration and tidal restoration.
Oh, them, right, Conservation District?
Cape Cod Conservation District did a study and looked at that area and had a public meeting at West Falmouth Library, and the neighbors were vehemently opposed to doing anything. It was tidally
That's right.
restricted. There's a small culvert there,
Yeah.
and the Conservation District and the Marine and Environmental Services talked about, doing this, that, and the other thing, and people were not supportive.
Right, it was restricted when the railroad came through in 1876. And that,
So they like their nitrogen the way they have it.
they like it, they were very concerned that if these culverts that exist now were changed or upgraded or made larger, or the flow was changed, they would all find the effect in their basements and in their houses, and they didn't want to go there.
That's a good question. Remember that?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, in fact,
That's
there
right.
was
Now
many
that
of.
you say it.
Make sure you keep that in writing for showing to
Oh, it's
them.
all right.
Anyway. All right, anything else on
Right.
West Falmouth Harbor from anybody on the committee? It's worth noticing, in the earlier plans that the town had for West Falmouth, they included the assumption that we were going to have to sewer that whole community. And I think it's worth noticing that we don't have to do that. That's a big step forward. It's a $24 million step forward.
Right. Yes, and we know from putting some water mains in the area that if we had to sewer West Falmouth, it would have been very difficult because it really is moraine and then a fringe of outwash at the foot of the moraine. So you're digging boulders most of the time, and it would have been a very difficult project.
That's very good news. That's the best news I've heard of any estuary.
But that
in terms
means
of change from
Yes.
cost of sewers. To
Yes.
cost of-
Right, right.
But we still haven't seen, that assumes the 3 milligrams per liter, right? If it isn't that, if it doesn't actually,
Well, no,
if
you-
that impact isn't there, then we have to rethink the whole thing, because
It's
yeah.
called lag time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
you know,
11 years is a pretty good lag time, 4,000 feet.
Yeah, like I said, my understanding was
Yeah.
it was a 6 to 7 year
it
time
was
frame,
10.
is what was discussed for a long time.
Right.
Yeah,
Because it is really close,
yes,
in both cases, particularly to the creek.
yes.
It's,
Well, so the coalition has mentioned that they are sure, unequivocally, without question, that it was the plume coming from the wastewater treatment facility that caused
Yes.
the problem in West Falmouth Harbor.
Right.
So we're sure about that, and they've got the water quality data
Yep.
and the well data, and because, we've asked this question before. So there's pretty much no question that it is the plume that caused the problem. So, they have water data, and they have it on their website, and, whenever I'm out with the coalition working on this West Falmouth project, because we collaborate, I say, so, how's the data looking? And they say, well, it's not equivocal, it's unequivocal, that if you look at their graphs, you sort of see it going down a little bit, but it's not clear that there's been an improvement in the Sentinel station, and they're still waiting for the plume. And it's based on, that 10 years was based on modeling and ground, there may be clay somewhere that nobody knew about in the middle of the whole thing. But I think Ron's idea to get the data that we do have from the wells that we have is a really good one.
Sure.
I think we've looked before, and there's some issue with, are they in the exact right place? But, the next couple of meetings, I'll make sure that we get some information from
Yeah.
Nathan on that.
Great.
all right,
We
we're
got it.
based on models. I'm a modeler, so and you need ground truthing.
Yes.
Right, and
Yeah.
Ron's point, I think the well data should tell us.
There
Yeah.
should be some trend. We
Right.
should be able to
Right.
see a trend.
If the wells are in the right place, and I
And
think.
at the right depth.
Right.
And at the
Yeah.
right depth, and I think there's one question, now that we've been doing PRBs, we know, you may not put your well in the exact right
Right.
place.
Nobody tells the plume what to do.
But if it's in the wrong
Well,
place,
gravity does.
we're even worse off.
Sometimes we're watching them.
Yeah.
Mystery plume.
We'll see, we'll
I
see
hear from
what
gravity
we
every day.
find out.
For phosphorus a long time ago, and I was looking at it.
All right. I think we got it.
Good.
Okay, good.
Next item, review revisions to the draft scenario for achieving TMDL compliance in Quistit Harbor.
Briefly. We talked last meeting about Quistit, and typically we have recommendations for how to modify our scenarios. And the modification request from Quistit was to remove the golf course from the counting of kilograms, because the golf course is in the outer harbor, and we're really concerned about the inner harbor. So here's the spreadsheet with the golf course zeroed out, and what it shows is an additional amount of shellfish, still well within the range of doable for an acre of aquaculture and bottom planting of cohogs. The other thing is that we looked and found that there's 15,000 square feet of area for quahog bottom planting, so there's ample room for 500,000 quahogs. So even if you remove the 37 kilograms from the golf course, a shellfish scenario in Quistit still works. And similarly, if you remove the golf course from IA scenario, innovative alternative septic system scenario, you can still do it with 47 homes. So both of the scenarios still hold without. So good thing.
Terrific.
Simple.
Comments or questions from the committee? Steve?
The other objection to the earlier Quistit Harbor one was that the shellfish wouldn't fit upstream of the bad area. Is this quahog scheme fit up there? I mean, it's like 10 feet between the Sentinel Station and land.
That 15,000 square feet is the inner harbor. That's what you asked me to do. You asked me to figure out.
Yeah, but do you still have that my favorite color slide?
Do I have it? Is it in this? Yes, of course it is. It's not even that bad.
There you go.
Current slide. Here we go.
Contour plot.
Yep.
And
So
your
this.
Sentinel is way up there.
This is it.
And so I think number
Let
of...
me show you what's going on here. This is the Quistit Harbor Boatyard. This is the Land Trust dock. This is Quistit Harbor Road. I know they're talking pretty well. This is where the Sentinel Station is, and this is where the cohogs would go. Right in the area of impairment.
In bags.
Cohogs would be bottom plane.
Bottom plane,
They goes underneath
And what
the-
fractional change are they supposed to be making in the concentration?
Well, half of it. Well, they're supposed to be, between them and the oysters, yeah, the oysters would have to be in gear.
That's what I was thinking of, because the oysters didn't work.
Yeah, the oysters did not work
In the bottom.
naturally, in the natural environment, they needed to be in gear. But the cohogs, I say, saw people cohog in there a couple of days ago. I mean, there's a viable natural set. I mean, it's more over here, the cohogs, but that would be, conceptually, you could fit cohogs in here as part of dealing with your more concentrated area. It's really the National Academy is right here is where the difference is.
Okay.
So, I just want to show you guys that.
Comments?
Yeah,
Questions? Tom?
Yeah, I missed the previous meeting where you had the discussion, but I noticed this issue of ranges and uncertainty came up a couple times. And when we talk about a specific number of systems to meet the standard, are we going to bracket that number and say plus or minus 5 or something? Because has the sensitivity analysis been done of some of these models where we know that if one or two things are off by so-and-so, do we need to rethink? For instance, septic systems, obviously for every one of these things, is the thing is the convenient nail that we've really got to hit. But we don't want to insist that it's exactly, in this case, 47, and have someone challenge it and say, well, actually, you don't really know because you haven't fine-tuned the system. So I'm just wondering, did that come up at all in the discussion last meeting?
It's come up from day one since this committee was established and way before that.
Right,
Everybody understands, all of this stuff is approximate.
Right, yeah, I'm a new kid on the block, and I'm just expressing my concerns about it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a better question is how is this going to actually happen in practice?
Right.
Let's say that we
That's where I'm headed with
recommend
this.
50 systems go in. Well, then you have 5-10 years to prove that your Sentinel station comes down to the required level, and if not,
You add some
more action is required. Is that
Right.
how it's going to
That's
go?
the adaptive management.
Okay.
Yep.
That is the answer, the regulatory answer to statistical uncertainty and sensitivity analyses is adaptive management.
Yeah, let's find out.
And the MEP report is unequivocal. It's got 3 decimal places. We've all seen it. There are no standard error bars on any of their graphs. And so there's a number. And the regulators have a TMDL that doesn't have error bars and doesn't have any, there's no sensitivity analysis on the TMDL either. It's a number. And so what people who think about these things have said is, what we need to do is have adaptive management so that we are targeting a particular
Right.
number and expect to see something and not. And if we don't, we have to do something. And that's the process of iterating sewers as well.
Right, and just, my concern is going forward, because there's always going to be questions arising, and just your explanation is a good one, but we just need to be prepared to say that. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We're going to wait a few years. And if it's better than we expected, we can't go back to some homeowners and say, well, your 5 houses didn't really need to be done. But, you know what I mean? I'm just trying to figure out downstream what.
I think that's a very unlikely scenario.
I do too, John. I agree with you, but I'm just trying to
No, it's the other, I mean,
It's
I
a
agree.
whole chapter in the CWMP. There's an entire chapter in the CWMP called adaptive management.
Yeah.
For just that reason.
Right.
But
That
no
all
chapter
makes
on
sense, but the
uncertainty.
danger is not that you have to go back and say, we didn't need to do 5 of them. We just won't say anything. We just have a party and say we met the goal. The danger is if it goes the other direction.
Right.
And somebody said, I think maybe Eric, that there are only 2 allowable steps, but correct me if I'm wrong, in this adaptive management. You only get 2 guesses.
Well,
The first guess and the second one is sewers. If that's true, then you want a big safety factor on your first guess.
Yeah.
But if you can show that you got within 90% with 47 houses, so obviously another 5 or 10 will get you there, that makes common sense, but it doesn't follow that the regulators use common sense.
My intuition is if they see that we're making substantial progress, they're not going to hold that guillotine over our heads.
Right, right. And it was the 208 planning that wrestled with this issue that you've just brought up. And so the way it was mapped out is, you know, you make an honest, well-informed effort to meet the TMDL. You're given 5 years to monitor that, make corrections at more or less year 5, and then another 5 years. But after 10 years, if what you have done is not sufficient, then you may get some feedback from the DEP. I agree with John that as long as we're moving in the right direction, I don't think that they would be harsh.
And none of us will be on the committee when that happens.
Well,
Don't worry.
that's also true.
Okay, number 4, summary of Little Pond Sewer Service area.
Eric, can I
Oh, sure.
interrupt? Sorry. If you need, since I need to leave,
Yeah.
do you actually need my signature on item number 5?
Yes.
Oh.
And if so,
Yes.
could I request that we skip to 5
Why
before
not?
4?
Let's do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This, number 5 is to sign the conflict of interest law summary, which unless we put it on the agenda, I would have forgotten it like I did last week. So everybody take one and sign it and get it back to me, and
Need one more down.
Yeah.
we'll get it to the town clerk.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think it requires any discussion. Oh, beautiful. All right, so meanwhile, back at the Little Pond Sewer Service area, we devoted several years of all of our lives to the nitty-gritty of planning and designing and costing and thinking and backing and forthing on the Little Pond Sewer Service area. The selectmen got a very nice presentation on the final outcome of all that at their meeting at 10 o'clock Monday night. I don't know if anybody out there saw it, but you're going to see it again. Because it's a good story.
Okay. Sia, can you advance the slides? So Amy Lowell, the wastewater superintendent, this is her presentation. And,
Keep going.
okay. Well, we need to flip to the next slide. And so she summarized both the cost and the next step legally, which has to do with issuing the betterments to the residents. She reported that the construction was complete, and so far we have somewhere around 500 homes that have connected. Roughly half and half are gravity and low pressure, and that some of the big water users, 9 commercial properties, have also hooked in. That funding was in 2014, and there was a vote at town meeting that set the percentages for the betterment. 70% to be paid by the property owners and 30% to be paid by the town. The town actually front-ends the money and the cost and then collects it through the betterment. The selectmen also had to vote a policy of how the betterment would be assessed, and it's called sewer equivalent units. They took as their measure a single-family home with a standard flow of 440 gallons per day. And then if you had a business that had more flow, or you had an apartment house with 4 units, that would be 4 SEUs. But by and large, this is a single residence area, and so there, with each one was 1 SEU. Next slide. By law, the selectmen are required to have a hearing and issue what's called an order of betterment assessment. And that is their estimated cost for the whole project, divided by the number of SEUs, which in the case for Little Pond was 1,608.25 SEUs. So you can see there that there are 1,424 properties, but 1,600 SEUs. You had 27 properties that, for various reasons, had more than one SEU. When you divide the total cost by the SEUs, you come out with an estimated betterment. By law, the selectmen cannot charge anything above that estimate, but when all the costs are in, if the costs are less, then the assessment would go down. Next slide. Okay. Next slide. Here we are with the final cost, about $30 million. It had been estimated at $37 million, and the assessment had been estimated at $16,000 per SEU, but actually is closer to $13,000. Next slide.
That's huge.
Certainly is. These are the exact numbers, 29,991, so on. And the exact betterment assessment is $13,054.02. Next slide. Based on the efforts largely of this committee and with the help of our state representatives, we were able to obtain a 0% loan for the cost of constructing the collection system, and we felt that that should be passed through to the homeowners. So they will not be paying any interest on their betterment, and in addition, they will be able to spread it out over 30 years up until we created this legislation. They would have had to pay it back in 20 years. Next slide. The next thing that the selectmen are going to do is to commit the assessments. So all of the people within the sewer service area will be receiving a letter saying, this is the amount. You have three options. You can pay it all at once, you can pay it in part, or you can spread it over the 30 years. And you need to respond in 30 days as to which option you choose. And starting in January, it will be on the tax bill. There's also a possibility to abate, and there's 6 months to do that. Okay, so now where are we? So we have 500 connected, roughly, and we have 1,400 total. So there are going to be a lot of connections going on for the next 9 months or so. There also is one more piece. It was recognized that the grinder pumps installations, which are about 700 total, cost more on average than a gravity sewer connection, and so there will be some reimbursement to the 700 properties that have used grinder pumps. The procedure for that reimbursement is something the selectmen still have to work out. And the final points that Amy made were that the same article that authorized the Little Pond Sewer Service Area authorized the construction of the Bournes Pond Inlet widening. But that project is separate and does not affect the betterment in any way. And then she said there have been some requests for properties outside, but I don't think we need to, it's not relevant. Okay. So.
Any comments or questions from the committee? Ron?
No, well, first, thank you very much. It's good to see how things came out. It's great to see that it came out even better financially for the town and the residents than we estimated, or the contractor estimated, as well as our consultant. The one thing, though, I think that when they talk about looking at the comparative costs of grinder pumps versus gravity hookups, okay, being higher. Well, there's such a variation out there. I mean, if a house is set back from the road with a sewer hookup, then it's going to be much more expensive than if it's nearby. I mean, it just seems, or if they have to go around the back of the house or the front. I mean, it isn't. I'm not sure how that is going to can be worked out exactly, because it's so variable. Unless there is
It's
some
not-
Just the
indicator.
cost of the pump.
No, the pump was covered by the town.
Yeah, the town
But-
provided the pump.
But
This
that's
is-
what you're talking about.
No, that's-
No, and there will be in
Installation.
addition, a cash, let's call it a stipend, a cash stipend to the 700 properties that have the grinder pumps to cover, to some degree, their additional costs for electricity or distance or whatever.
But the distance part, what I'm saying, the distance part is a separate variable, because if they had had the same property, but it was a little bit higher, so it could have had a gravity flow, it also would have been wrong. It's not the grinder pump itself that made them have that extra length cost. That was something built into their property.
Yeah,
And
but
it
they-
generally is going to be correlated
Right.
with a longer run for more expensive property, so I would think you would want to just reimburse them for the pump and the electrical connection to it.
So I think this is something we don't need to agonize over.
Yeah,
Right,
that
it's
is-
not ours, it's
that's-
not in our
Thank
jurisdiction.
goodness.
Right.
I suspect there will be a unit cost per SU
Yeah.
for sewer service,
Yes,
and we
and
don't
that
need
will
to
be
think
it.
about it.
Right,
Yeah, right.
yes, we've,
Fair enough.
we got it.
Right.
Right, but
Okay, conflict of interest statements we've already done. Report of members and staff. We have reports of any members and staff? No. Minutes of the prior meeting were sent around. Everybody got a look at them? Are there any additions or corrections? Ron?
yeah, just one thing. On the reports of members and staff, we talked about the Borns Fund field visit,
Oh, yeah.
right? And in it, one thing that was not mentioned is that when we looked at the ulva, and there's a fibrous algae and other species there, we not only found it in the areas where the planting was done, but in an area where there was no planting done. And we didn't visit a quahog area to actually see what the situation was there. But that should be mentioned, that what we did observe was that it wasn't just because of the planted oysters that ulva was evident,
Right.
or to what quantity, but also in other areas. It just happened to be the year.
Yeah, no, it was a good year for Ulva.
It was a
And
good, okay.
Apparently,
So-
even in West Falmouth Harbor, you were saying. we saw-
Well, I saw a very little bit, but we hadn't seen any on the oysters in West Falmouth Harbor before. But this year, there was just a few of them had a little bit of growth on them. So as Eric just said, it could be just, this is the year of the rainfall, the whatever it was.
Or warm.
Yeah, warm.
So I have a question. I'm looking at the actual language because we have to change it so you guys can vote on it. Oysters and ulva and other seaweed was evident at bottom planted sites as well as other
As well as
sites?
other sites, yeah, that would be fine. Other sites observed or whatever, that would be good.
As well as other
Yeah.
sites visited.
Okay, that sounds like an amendment. Everybody in agreement on that one?
That's fine with me.
Any further additions or
Move that
corrections?
they be accepted
Not
as.
correct, but has a location been set for the joint meeting with Mashpee? I noticed.
Mashpee Town Hall.
Oh, it's at the town hall.
Yeah.
At their.
Carpool.
Yeah.
I won't be there.
Is it
so-
7 or 7:30 now?
It says 7 here.
7.
7 o'clock.
This is at the next meeting, 2 weeks from now, in Mashpee.
That's the next-
In the evening.
Did you guys accept the minutes?
Not yet?
Not yet.
We will.
Not yet. I was creating a little speed bump.
Yes. All right, well, if the speed bump is not an addition or a correction to the minutes,
It's not.
we'll give me a motion to accept the minutes.
Move the minutes of 9:21.
Second. Further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
With the
Opposed?
amendment.
I'm
As
abstaining.
amended.
With the amendment.
With,
yes.
with the amendment and with the abstention. All right.
Who abstained?
All in favor?
Tom?
Did we get an aye there?
Yes.
Okay, good. All opposed? No, the ayes have it, good. So we know where the next meeting is, we know when, we know what the topic is.
May I move adjournment? then?
Esmes Dartmouth will be there to tell us the results of the work they've been doing in the Moonacus River,
Yep.
and it'll be a larger discussion about Mashpee and us in Wacoit Bay.
Okay.
A motion to adjourn.
Mark might have a question.
Oh,
Back to the West Falmouth Harbor. I was trying to look through the
yeah,
TMDL
could you
report.
get to a microphone here so that the public can hear you?
Mark, in the
Mark, can you spell your last name for me, please?
Gurney, G-U-R-N-E-E.
Thank you.
I was looking at the TMDL report. I couldn't, just a question of fact, I couldn't see if it included physical build-out and occupational build-out in terms of roads. Is it based on projected increases in occupations of houses plus numbers of houses?
There is a build-out analysis done as part of that document.
And that's what all the, so many grams of nitrogen or whatever are based on, the build-out, or are they based on?
There are two scenarios. There's an existing conditions scenario and there's a build-out scenario. So both are in view.
And the projections you're looking at for?
Well, those were based on the
Number of systems,
wastewater
yeah.
treatment facility. I'd have to look and see how they treated the wastewater treatment facility. Our analysis doesn't change what MEP does, so I'd have to look and see how they treated the wastewater treatment facility, whether they did current conditions or build out. So I'd have to look.
But
Looking at physical build-out is usually pretty easy. It didn't look like there was a lot of unbuildable property in this area, but everybody knows around here that more and more people stay in their houses. So the nitrogen load goes up, even though the number of houses doesn't change. And the question is that included? As we're
No,
talking
they-
about
they-
37 systems or whatever the gentleman brought up. Well, if we have to go to 137 because of, more occupation, then it gets to be sort of
I think,
difficult.
as I recall, the DEP presumption is that year-round houses and seasonal houses produce the same basic quantity of nitrogen, isn't that
Yep.
right?
And the intensity of use is factored in by the water use. So the MEP report is based on the actual water use. And every watershed is actually a little bit different. So that intensity is captured in water use, and what we do when we go forward is we look at what the MEP has for water use, and then we take 3 years of current water use and are able to see that they're usually pretty much the same. But it's all based on water use, so it is intensity of use.
So is that the answer? Is yes, it does take
Yes.
build out and occupational increases?
Yes, I would say so.
do
Because we're gonna,
do all the draft scenarios that you've been showing us, do they take into account build-out?
we do not look at, that's a hard question to answer, because it does take into account water use. And so water use is how much water is being used. Like in Oyster Pond, the water use number was based on how much water is being used.
So that's current.
But the MEP was done in 2010, and the water use numbers are from 2015. I'm just using numbers. So the intensity of use from a water use perspective is current conditions, which included whatever build-out happened from the time that the early document was done and the current document is being looked at.
But it would seem to me prudent planning would either put in a safety factor or an actual calculation for build-out, because you want it to keep working when it's built out, or a note that on all of these watersheds, there's going to be a rule that we do what we're saying we're going to do, plus any new building has to
Right.
put in an eco-toilet. Just kidding, but has to put in
Or an IA system.
something. Very expensive.
So we,
Don't put that.
in the Oyster Pond alternatives analysis, that's exactly what we did. We said this is going to meet the TMDL at current conditions, and it assumes future development will either hook up to the sewer if it's a sewer, or put in an IA system if it's an IA system.
I'm coming because that's a little tricky, because that you can control, but you can't control somebody retiring recently, moving down here finally, along with his daughter and their children, into a house that used to have 2 people 4 months a year, now has 5 people all year.
That's less of a trend than you might think, actually. When the assessors records in terms of what's seasonal and year-round, it hasn't changed much. We're about 50-50 in terms of the structures in town.
Raising this point, said that was a major increase, occupational of house, current house.
I keep hearing you say that, and I'm suggesting it's
I didn't
not.
say the numbers, it just said it was a substantial increase.
There can be differences between towns. We looked very carefully at water use when we were doing the Little Pond Sewer Service area, defined area, definite number of parcels. And we found that the seasonal houses used as much water as the year-round houses. They just use more of it at one time.
And there wasn't a trend from 2001,
That's
which
right.
is when the MEP did its water use, and 2013, when we relooked at the water use. That's what I'm trying to say, is that's not, in fact, what happened in that watershed.
Right. So, anyway. We have a motion to adjourn. I think I lost on the way. Uh-oh.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved, seconded, discussed. All in
voted.
There we
favor?
go.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes, have it. Thank you.